Time now for Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. Here's Nick Slegel and Brian Dezelske.
Welcome to another episode of Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. My name is Nick Slegel, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Brian Dezelske. Brian, how's it going today, buddy?
It's going great, man. Week 1 of preseason is in the books. Got a lot to talk to. A lot of storylines, injuries, player position battles. We got a lot to cover today.
Yeah, definitely. We have Chris Cochran coming on in a little bit, as well as my good friend Matt Rittle to talk some fantasy football. So I'm really excited about some good interviews today. But let's hop right into the news for a minute. Lots of injuries, like we talked about last week. It seems to be the year of the injury. You know what I mean? We had Denario Alexander, who for me was one of my best late season waiver wire pickups last year. Really helped me in the stretch towards the postseason. Went down with an ACL tear, out for the season, which obviously hurts the Chargers. But now we have news yesterday that Malcolm Floyd also hurt his knee. Right now we're seeing multiple reports on this. Some are calling it a strain, some are calling it a sprain, which are two very different things. The only thing I think we know positively right now is that it's not a full-on ACL tear or anything like that. But Malcolm Floyd's still obviously expected to miss some time. Where does this leave the Chargers from a fantasy standpoint?
In shambles. I to be honest with you, it hurts. It hurts Phillip Rivers. It hurts Ryan Matthews. It even hurts Antonio Gates, because I know Gates is probably going to see a lot more targets now, but they're going to, defenses are going to be able to roll coverage his way. And I think what it's going to do is it's going to help guys like Eddie Royal, who may probably have gone undrafted in most leagues under normal circumstances. They might slip in to the bottom of some drafts now. A guy like Keenan Allen looks really intriguing right now. Robert Meacham, he's still there. He disappeared, throughout his career at times with the New Orleans Saints in that offense, but he would come out of nowhere and, have a couple of, a monster game on like 2-3 catches here and there. He's a guy you might want to take a look at later on in the rounds, and he might see some targets downfield from Phillip Rivers. Vincent Brown's an intriguing guy, although I don't know if he's a guy that can be a number one, because I kind of feel like he would be their number one receiver with Floyd and Alexander both out. I don't know if he's a guy that can just be that guy. I think he might need to be, a number two, with a true number one alongside him. Well, that's stuff we're all going to find out here, shortly, but things aren't looking good in San Diego right now. What about you? What are you thinking?
For me, and I think from a fantasy perspective and just a real football perspective, I think this puts most of the pressure on Ryan Matthews at this point. If he can stay healthy, they are going to try to grind it out with him a little more to open up the passing game more easily for Phillip Rivers and company. So I think now is the time to buy Ryan Matthews if you think he can stay healthy, because I think his value just went up. Vincent Brown is definitely the guy to watch for me, though. I was very high on him coming out of college. I was very disappointed with the way they used him last year. And all reports before anyone went down with an injury were that they were really going to lean on him and try to feature him this year. So I think that's just more of a concrete plan at this point. So, buy low on Vincent Brown while you can in the next day or two, because his value is going to skyrocket real soon. Outside of that, yeah, Eddie Royal is a guy maybe take a flyer on. I don't know if he has any fantasy value anymore at this point, even if he ends up being the number 2 in the offense for a few weeks. It's just, that I'm probably still clear that.
Yeah, that's my sentiments exactly. Like I said, he may creep up into the bottom half of some drafts, but he's not anybody that should really be on anyone's radar.
No, I think we're looking at, depending on a second year player that did almost nothing last year in Vincent Brown, excuse me, and we don't really know what to expect. And then two very injury prone players in Antonio Gates and Ryan Matthews. So I think it hinges really on the offensive line stepping up, which is not looking good for them right now, but it's early still. And then Ryan Matthews staying healthy, because that'll open up the passing game. And I think you can make do with lackluster receivers if your running game is humming along.
Right. Now, Green Bay, rookies, running backs, your boy Fat Eddie, strained hamstring, buddy. What are you hearing over there about Eddie Lacy so far after straining his hamstring last week?
Yeah, it looks like he pulled up lame on a run. Just one of those tight muscle over exercising in the summer type things. They're just going to take it easy, lots of massage, lots of, bike work for a few days. He'll be ready to go by week 1, it looks like. I don't think there's any worries here. From a fantasy perspective, you know, with all of the Packers running backs, Eddie Lacy and Jonathan Franklin mostly, but even James Starks, Alex Green, and the rest, it's Mike McCarthy has never shown an ability to properly utilize running backs. Even when Ryan Grant was one of the better running backs in the league over an 8-game stretch,
Right.
he would abandon it very, very easily. And I think that's something fantasy owners really need to be concerned about going forward with Eddie Lacy. I'm not saying don't draft him, because you could hit a home run here, but it's one of those things where you need to not be depending on him as your certainly not your running back 1, and not even your running back 2, really. I mean, we're talking running back 3 or flex, because that
Just
way, if things don't go well, you can replace him.
just make sure you temper expectations, is basically what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah. Don't get too excited. I mean, he is a very good ball player, and he was promising in mini camps and everything. But it's just one of those things you really have to take a wait and see approach. I really feel like we won't have a solid idea of how Eddie Lacy will be utilized with the Packers, how any running back will be, till at least week 5 or 6 at the earliest.
So with Lacey taking the last week off basically from practice and whatnot, and he missed the game this last week. Has Jonathan Franklin capitalized on the extra playing time in practice? What are you hearing over there from Jonathan Franklin, or about
Sort
Jonathan Franklin? Excuse me.
Sort of. The problem here is it was never a question if he can make an impact on the ground in the running game. Even as a returner, he's showing great work in all 3 categories on the practice field. The problem is pass protection. And this is something Franklin was actually pretty good with at UCLA, but he has struggled thus far picking up, the blitz, the defenders. And I think that's a thing that's going to hurt his playing time, because until the offensive line in Green Bay is solidified and doing well, and God only knows when that'll be, it's one of those things where they're going to have a running back in there that can do the pass blocking, can help in that aspect. And Eddie Lacy stands head and shoulders above the rest in that category so far. So I think that's why he is, far ahead above the rest, even though I've said time and time again, Jonathan Franklin is the better overall running back, and I'll never stop saying that. But until Franklin can work, get his pass blocking up to par, it's going to hurt his fantasy value.
Yeah. Okay. I thought maybe he would take that extra week and really, try and step up and, show the coaching staff, something there while Lacey was sidelined. But anyway, let's turn our attention to the AFC East in particular, or excuse me, the AFC North. The Baltimore Ravens, they lost Dennis Pitta early in early in camp, and now they've lost Ed Dixon. Ed Dixon went down with a torn hamstring. It looks like he's going to be out until at least through week 1, could be longer. The Ravens went on and signed Dallas Clark just a few days ago. Actually, I believe on Sunday they went and signed him after already bringing on Visante Shenko about a week earlier after losing Pitta. Who saw this coming out in Baltimore? If anybody out there projected these 2 tight ends to start week 1 for the Baltimore Ravens, you are Nostradamus in my opinion, because things are just crumbling in Baltimore. What are your thoughts about Dixon going down?
Oh, so much. Torrey Smith is more valuable. Joe Flacco slightly less valuable. Um, it's one of those things where even if Dixon is ready to go by week 2, ready to go, he's not going to be NFL ready. That just means he's healthy enough to participate on the field. I mean, we're looking at Dixon probably not making a significant impact until at least week 4. That's really leaving the Ravens offense just hurting for production. I mean, Dallas Clark was useless with Tampa Bay last year. He's a great veteran mind and leader to have on your team. Don't get me wrong, but he's not going to help the offense. Asante Shenko was never really anything special except for a couple years of Brett Favre. Correct me if I'm wrong. He didn't even play in the NFL last year, right? I don't think he was on a team last year. I could be wrong, but as far as I know, he made no impact because I can't even think that he played for anybody. Um, yeah, the Patriots are the last team he was on. He didn't even make an impact there. So it's one of those things where, I don't see Shenko or Dallas Clark really making that much of an impact, but I think Shenko, if either, is going to have to just because, man, that's a starting tight end week 1 now. And, who else are you really going to rely on from a fantasy perspective? Tandon Doss? Ford? There's too many question marks after Torrey Smith. I don't know. Besides Torrey Smith's value going up, Ray Rice's and Bernard Pierce's value going up a little bit.
I can see Ray Rice catching a lot more balls out of the backfield now.
Yes, yep, that's definitely true. So I think
an absurd amount of balls out of the backfield now.
Yeah, he's going to have to. There's just nobody else. So I think Flacco's value might take just a little bit of a dip, but not really because he'll find a way to get the ball to whoever needs it. But it's just one of those things where, from a fantasy perspective, I'm not buying Shenko or Dallas Clark, maybe even really Ed Dixon at all. Are you?
No, I'm not buying any of the two guys that they brought in. I mean, you're gonna see them, maybe snag a touchdown here and there, over the course of the season, but they're not gonna, in my opinion, there's no real fantasy value there. I mean, there was fantasy value with Dennis Pitta because that was one of Flacco's top targets, but I don't see these guys like filling, meeting or exceeding that role that Pitta or even Dixon had in that Ravens offense. And like you said, Dallas Clark was non-existent last year in Tampa Bay. I think he had one touchdown. Maybe I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think it's one touchdown he had last year. I don't have any faith in either one of those guys going forward this season at all.
Yeah, I'm with you. So, let's move to offensive line for just a second, which is something we normally don't talk about in fantasy unless you're in, one of those crazy awesome 55-man roster leagues, which are a lot of fun, by the way. But the Atlanta Falcons tackle, Mike Johnson, severely dislocated his ankle and broke his leg. What sort of impact is this going to have on not only Matt Ryan, but Steven Jackson, their new running back that they were really going to depend on after a terrible year by Michael Turner last year? Should we be concerned about S-Jax possibly having a little bit of dip in production now?
Well, yeah, to be honest, I'm going to start off by saying this. I wasn't as high on Steven Jackson as everybody else out there has been over the course of the summer and leading into camp as far as fantasy relevancy. He's kind of, I mean, he's been a workhorse for the St. Louis Rams for a number of years, but I feel like there's been so much tread, worn off those tires. I just feel like his time is, his time has come where he's on the downside of his career, and they think, pundits are out there thinking that the change to Atlanta is gonna, revitalize that, and I just don't see it. And now they're starting right tackle, Mike Johnson, go down for the season. That dislocated ankle and a fractured fibula, that's just horrible. But he was in there to replace Tyson Clabo, who went to Miami. Now they're going to have to rely on Lamar Holmes and Ryan Schrader. They're going to duel it out here in the during the preseason here to compete for that starting job at right tackle. that's that the Falcons, they run on the right side most of the time. That's their power side. If you remember watching Michael Turner, that the vast majority of their runs were either up the middle to the right side, and now they're going to rely on some unproven guys to fill that role on the right side there. So I think Steven Jackson is going to take a little dip in production, even from where I had him ranked, and definitely he's going to fall from where a lot of people have him. A lot of people have him as a low end first round pick right now, and I didn't. I saw him more as a middle second round pick. But I don't necessarily think Matt Ryan is going to suffer too much. I think Aaron Rodgers is a perfect example. Say there's a huge hole on the right side all year long, and he's getting lit up. He's getting sacked left and right. Aaron Rodgers led the league last year. He got sacked 51 or 54 times.
53.
50. Okay, I knew it was in that range. 53 times, and he still puts up the numbers he did. And obviously Matt Ryan's got the targets, or the talent around him. You got Julio Jones, you got Roddy White, you have Tony Gonzalez. So that I don't see Matt Ryan's production dipping too much there. The one guy that really worries me is Steven Jackson, and I think people are going to be somewhat disappointed for how high they're going to be drafting him on what he's going to give them when the season is over.
Yeah, I agree. And I think with Steven Jackson too, I don't remember my exact projection, but I think I said around 1,150 yards. I'm saying over the course of the season, he might miss out on 80 yards. He's still going to have over 1,000 yards. He'll still put up 10 scores. I'm not too worried about his production. He's a guy that can make wicked cuts for a guy his size. So even with the right side being their power side, if he starts to cut that way and things don't look good, he can make just an amazing cut back to the left and take it upfield. So I'm not too worried, but at his age, it's something you should be concerned about, because any extra wear and tear at this point, any extra unwarranted hits are a cause for concern. I'm not trying to say he's going to decline. I'm not saying he's old and fragile. It's just a dude at that age with 10,000, yards, actually 13,000 total all-purpose yards on his body. It's going to take a toll eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are saying he's going to be a double-digit touchdown guy. He hasn't scored double-digit touchdowns, I believe, since 2005 or 2006. And granted, the teams that he was on in St. Louis weren't all that stellar, but you kind of look at a guy. I know it's a different position, but look at a guy like Andre Johnson in Houston. Andre Johnson's never caught double-digit touchdowns in his career ever, and everybody keeps putting him on over the course of the year. I mean, over the course of his career, he was a top 2 or 3 guy, in terms of fantasy, but he never put up consistent, ever double-digit touchdown, seasons. Steven Jackson's kind of the same guy. He hasn't done it since 05 or 06. Like I said, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I personally don't see him being a 10 touchdown guy. I see him being like a 7 or 8 touchdown guy, maybe. And, like you said, 1,000 to 1,100 yards. And he might be closer to the 1,000 now that, they got this, issue on the offensive line.
Yeah, I think the thing there is too, though, you have to realize he has spent 9 seasons running the ball with 9 stacked in the box, 8 to 9 stacked in the box, always. For once in his life, he's going to be able to go up against front 6, front 7 at the most. Sometimes even less as they drop back in zone coverage and things like that. So I think it's going to help him more than anything for the first time ever. And that's why I projected him for, double-digit touchdowns for the first time ever.
Yeah, I mean, I like we sit here and, we hammer out our thoughts and, our projections and our, what we think is going to happen. I mean, the only thing that we can do is sit back and watch, and eventually time will tell what's going to happen. But I would take him on my team if he fell to me in the late second round, or even the top of the third round, I would take him. I mean, maybe I'm just really, really low on the guy versus everybody else, but if he fell to me in the late second round, I would draft him and I would have him on my team. But I still wouldn't take him in the late first to the early the mid second round, especially because with this injury here on the offensive line, I'm going to definitely stay away from him.
Yeah, I'm with you. So real quick, let's just touch on preseason week 1. Technically week 2 if you want to count the Hall of Fame game as week 1. Was there anything that stood out here to you, or is it still just too early to really make any fantasy assumptions?
Well, one thing that did stand out to me was, and I know let's preface this by saying it's too early to make any sort of assumptions, but I saw it mostly on TV. I didn't get to actually catch the game. I saw the highlights, on the 4-letter network over there out east, but they were talking about Steven Jackson, and they were talking about how poorly he looked in his first game, as an Atlanta Falcon, and that was the one thing that stuck out to me. And then that was actually before I had heard about the Mike Johnson injury. So then I heard about the Mike Johnson injury, and that it just kind of makes you wonder how effective he's really going to be this year. I mean, they were saying he looked slow. They were saying he looked old. The word used was old. So, those are just things that I worry about when it comes to Stevie Jackson.
Yeah, I think really the one thing that stood out for me through the preseason was, well, two things really. Stephon Taylor, rookie running back out of Stanford that plays for the Cardinals. I've been really high on him, saying he was eventually going to overtake Mendenhall anyway. And he ran very well against the Packers, which is not saying much, but he did. And I liked what I saw, and I want to continue to see him do that because I think he's really going to move up in their depth chart, not only, but also in fantasy rankings. And then my boy Nuke Hopkins, DeAndre Hopkins, playing for Houston Texans. Always very high on him. Was kind of worried with Schaub and, Andre Johnson already there, how he was going to fit in, and he did work. That awesome 54-yard touchdown catch. So he's a guy I'm excited about, and as the preseason progresses, I'm almost certain we're going to watch his ADP rise quite quickly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I got a chance to catch the game, and he did. He looked really good. DeAndre Hopkins looked really good. He looked comfortable in that offense, and that's not a word people use when it comes to rookies, especially receivers starting out. He looked comfortable in that offense, and if that can be scary for teams that are going to be going up against that that Texans offense. And if you can get like you said, his ADP is going to rise, and if you can get him and he can put up some wide receiver 3 numbers, you got yourself an absolute steal there with D-Hop. Cordarrelle Patterson actually looked not too shabby either. He had he had 4 catches for 54 yards or something like that.
Yeah.
He looked pretty good for his first time out, but you could tell he still has a lot to learn, and he's definitely a few notches behind Hopkins right now. Like, Hopkins looked really, really, really good.
Yeah, with Hopkins, he's sort of at his ceiling already. I mean, yes, he's going to get better. Yes, he's going to progress to be that number 1 receiver for the Texans eventually. But his skill set is very well rounded already. Cordarrelle Patterson is just hyper talented. I called him the most talented receiver in this draft class. But very, very unpolished. And I think that's just what's going to take some time, take some work, because he can be a bigger, stronger Percy Harvin in the Vikings offense. He can run the ball from the backfield. He can run the short routes and eat up the yards after the catch. He can line up on the outside and go deep, and he can return kicks. So Cordarrelle Patterson is a guy I'm very excited to watch from a fantasy perspective. Obviously, as a Packer fan, I'm not so psyched about it. But it's one of those things where I'm excited to watch him, and I think he's gonna do a good job progressing.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I'm excited to see him. I can't wait. I hope he flourishes this year because as a Vikings fan, we need some help alongside Greg Jennings, definitely.
It's very true. So I think that's all we have for the first segment. So we are going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we will have Chris Cochran from Pro Football Central.
Football fans, check out the official t-shirt apparel shop for the Pro Football Central Radio Network. Check out bigfrog.com/Cincinnati. That's bigfrog.com/Cincinnati. You think it, we ink it. They have an awesome 24-hour turnaround time. You can also visit them at their fabulous store over at Anderson Town Center, 7426 Beachmont Avenue, Cincinnati, Ohio 45255. That's bigfrog.com/Cincinnati.
And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. We are joined now by Chris Cochran, contributing fantasy writer for PFC. Chris, how's it going, buddy?
Not much, just waking up, living the dream down here in South Florida with the South Beach heat.
Awesome, man. So recently on PFC, you wrote an article about the Vikings and Greg Jennings and their offense.
Yes.
Can you break it down a little bit for us? What do you see from Jennings this year joining the Vikings?
Well, the thing I see from them is he's completely going under the radar right now. In a wide receiver class that's so deep, he's, everybody forgets that he's 29 years old. He blended in with Green Bay. So now you're giving him the chance to be the sole number one option, since Percy Harvin's gone. We have Adrian Peterson running all over the earth. And Kyle Rudolph, who we're expecting him to progress as a player. So that being said, my thinking and my logic and what I expect to happen is you have a player who's I think a better route runner than Percy Harvin. You can line him up in the slot like they did with Percy Harvin. Of course, you're not going to take Greg Jennings and put him under center like they did with Percy Harvin last year and the years before. And he's the only guy they have. And, the way you set up your offense, your defense is, what are you going to do? Are you going to cheat one man up in the box and have 8 man trying to stop trying to stop Adrian Peterson? Because you're probably going to have to do that, and he'll still gash you up. That leaves one-on-one coverage with Greg Jennings. And then you also have to account for Kyle Rudolph, who, last year he was pretty ineffective in between the 20s, but coming into the red zone, he was destroying everybody. You guys see the stats. What is it, 10 touchdowns last year?
Yeah, he had 9 touchdowns last year. But here's the thing, being up in Minnesota, I'm a huge Vikings fan. Everybody up here is. We all love the fact that Jennings plays for the team. But we have one issue with the entire offense, and that's the quarterback position. Does Christian Ponder worry you at all?
No, because it's fantasy football. Just get the ball to Greg Jennings. I don't care how he, plays. Just as long as Greg Jennings gets 7 catches a game, that's, what does that translate to, 60 yards, 80 yards? I don't really care anything else about the quarterback play. Just, get the ball to.
But it's the quarterback that gets the ball to the receiver, and Christian Ponder struggled last year getting the ball out. Percy Harvin, he worked it inside, across the middle. He was able to get open, and Ponder did some things early on in the season, but as the season progressed, he got progressively worse and worse. So when it comes to fantasy football, Jennings kind of worries me as a wide receiver too. Maybe I'd take him more as a wide receiver, high-end wide receiver 3 right now. Mm-hmm. And then maybe, if anything above and beyond that would be icing on the cake for me. I just worry about the wide receiver position with a subpar quarterback. That's the one thing that kind of worries me, but you don't see that as an issue at all.
Not really. It's, I'm not saying draft Minnesota team. I'm saying just take a look at Greg Jennings. And I also think Matt Castle should start in Minnesota, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So here's my thing with the Vikings in general. Ponder had no one to throw to but Rudolph last year. I think with Jennings, with Rudolph, and then even you can't forget Cordarrelle Patterson. They traded back into the first round to get this guy. He's talented. He can do some of the things that Percy Harvin could do in that offense. My thing is, I think Ponder's going to be okay, but between Adrian Peterson, gunning for 2,000 yards again, and 3 targets, quality targets to throw the ball to now, is there going to be enough enough left over for Jennings to make a fantasy impact is my bigger worry here.
I mean, the matchups give him allow him to make the impact. Wouldn't you agree?
I would think so. I mean, in theory, yes. I think you're completely right. It's just I think as a fantasy owner, the only thing that worries me is Adrian Peterson is obviously going to touch the ball 4 times as much as anyone else in the offense, and then you still have 2 other receivers, one of them being Christian Ponder's favorite target, and it's not Greg Jennings. I worry about Jennings getting the targets he needs to be like a legitimate fantasy wide receiver 2. So I think I'm with Brian when I say right now, like wide receiver 3, high wide receiver 3 is where I'm looking at him right now.
And I absolutely agree with you when it comes to Matt Castle. If Matt Castle was the starting quarterback week 1, I would be drafting Greg Jennings as a wide receiver 2 as well. My whole thing is the quarterback play of Christian Ponder. He just struggled so often. And outside of Percy Harvin, like you even stated, Kyle Rudolph struggled in between the 20s. He wasn't the only one that struggled in between the 20s outside of Percy Harvin. Percy Harvin went down, was week 7 or week 8. I can't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah, I hate that last year. I had him.
But when he went down, there was nobody catching the ball, 20 to 20. It was inside the 20. Rudolph would get a touchdown here and there, but outside that, they had no confidence in Ponder dropping back and throwing the ball. They just handed the ball off to AP. I just worry that might be the case here starting off the first couple of weeks. And if the Vikings slump as a team, maybe they make the switch to Matt Castle. And if they do make the switch to Matt Castle, I'm right there with you. I'm all over Greg Jennings because Greg Jennings is a stud. Nick will tell you, he's from Wisconsin. He's a big Packer fan. He's watched Greg Jennings tear it up for a number of years. So we all know that the guy's got talent. But as far as, fantasy is concerned, he just worries me as like being your wide receiver 2 as your, I'd take him as definitely as a.
I mean, someone has to catch the balls though. Someone has to catch the balls there. I mean, I absolutely. That's the logic behind. I mean, that's why I'm sitting there thinking with Greg Jennings, someone has to catch these balls. And would they paid him like $10 million in the offseason?
They did. Absolutely, they did.
So someone has to catch these balls, and Cordell Patterson, he's raw, and I see them using him as kind of like the gadget guy, but someone has to catch these balls on the outside. They're just not going to go ahead and run with Peterson, 40 times a game, and then like someone, it's just the balls have to go somewhere.
All right, well let's turn our attention from one pass catcher to another. Jimmy Graham. You seem to be pretty high on Jimmy Graham this year. You think he has the potential to be a top 10 fantasy player outside the quarterback position. So we're talking running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. What are you seeing down in New Orleans that makes you think that Jimmy Graham's going to be top 10 material this year?
Well, I mean, I saw him since I lived down here. He played for the University of Miami, and he played basketball down here. And then his senior year, he played football, and it kind of came out of nowhere. But his athleticism translated so well to the football. And then he came in. He was drafted in the 3rd round, made a decent impact, and then out of nowhere, he just blew up with 1,300 yards receiving at tight end in that offense. So the reason why I think he will be good he will be a top athlete is given his health, because that's always a question when it comes to these fantasy football in general. We don't care about the player, we only care about the health and who can step up. So I think Jimmy Graham will be a top 10 player strictly because the tight end position is so thin right now. It's like you have Gronk, who we're not really sure about. You have Aaron Hernandez locked up away writing letters to, don't get this on social media. And we have Tony Gonzalez and Jason Witten. And all those guys are, they're PPR targets. But the one thing I think they lack is they lack the yards. And I'm not talking like the 900,000 receiving yards. They lack the 1,300 to 1,500 receiving yards. And I think that's what Jimmy Graham can get given a full season of health in that Saints offense. I mean, he led the team in targets last year with the team that just threw dump passes to Darren Sproles, had Marcus Colston also, and Lance Moore all had triple digits in targets, and he still led that. Granted, Darren Sproles missed a portion of the year with his forearm, but Jimmy Graham led that entire team in that passing offense in targets last year, and he wasn't healthy. Give him a full season with that offense and that offensive line to give Drew Brees time and his athletic playmaking ability at the tight end position. I can't see him not dominating at all. And if you draft him, what you're getting basically is a tight end masked as a wide receiver. And you could draft him with so much depth at the wide receiver position that you could actually get Graham in the second round and then go ahead in the third round and possibly, if you're lucky, get like a Vincent Jackson who might fall. Those type of play. You know what I mean? Like those fringe guys who kind of fall, who are deserving of a second round but fall to the third round just out of a pure numbers game. That's why I think that Jimmy Graham could be a top 10 player.
Okay, I see. I like your logic. I can follow it. I see where you're going. So you're totally comfortable taking Graham in the second round and really, like, in theory, relying on him sort of as a wide receiver one.
Yeah, basically, because as a tight end, like, that's only because the wide receiver position is so deep now. Like, if it was as deep and you maybe had like, a handful of number ones, and then you go ahead and you have like, an okay amount of number twos. But no, there are so many wide receivers that, like, I could throw out names right now and you could be like, well, I could see that, I wouldn't mind having him as my my number two option. Like Cecil Shorts. Like, would you mind having him as your number two?
I would if Chad Henne's the quarterback. See, I'm going back to quarterback play again. Blaine Gabbert as the starter, I really struggle with. I put Cecil Shorts in as my flex option. Chad Henne and Cecil Shorts.
My point is like you would be happy with him on your team if you have Jimmy Graham. Like if you go ahead and you get Jimmy Graham in the second round, like, and you're gonna find a wide receiver who could contribute as well later in the rounds, just because it's a passing league and there's so many wide receivers out there that. Why not take Jimmy Graham? You're gonna. Right. It's a guaranteed. It's a guaranteed 16 points a week, just on pure matchup on who he is as a player.
Yeah, that's true, and he is going to see a ton of targets, especially with that Saints defense being god awful. But they're going to air it out often. He's obviously their most impactful vertical receiver, so he's going to get the target. So I see that. I'm not big on taking a tight end in the second round, but I see your logic. It makes sense.
Like if he was strictly like a tight end like a Gronk, hell yeah, I'd agree with you on that. But I mean, he's what he does. It's not tight end numbers.
Yeah,
it's wide receiver numbers. It's dominating the game, playmaking ability numbers, not Gronkowski 17 touchdowns. Yeah, that's awesome, but I mean, do we expect Gronk to do that again? I could totally see Jimmy Graham putting up AJ Green numbers, with just as a tight end, because that's how they use him. They use him as a wideout, not a tight end. But he's listed as a tight end because it's that's what they have him as. But they use him as a wideout also.
Yeah. So moving on to another article that you wrote about players you were high on and not so high on. One of the ones that stuck out to me was Doug Martin. Apparently you're not very high on the muscle hamster. And you even in your article said you would rather take Arian Foster, among others, number 2 overall ahead of Doug Martin. That almost made my head explode, but that's because I'm not a very big Foster fan. What's your reasoning here for no love for the muscle hamster?
The reason why is I had him last year. So, I guess I could speak from experience. By being I flourished with him on my team, but I took a look at his numbers, and I'm not saying that you don't draft him number 2, but there's other guys that you can draft at number 2, who I think are worthy enough. Jamal Charles, Sean McCoy, Arian Foster, and if I'm the number 2, and if I have the number 2 pick in the draft, I want guys who are going to basically virtually just dominate every game. If you go look at Doug Martin's stats, there were some games where he just wasn't really a factor. But there were other games where he blew up. And, I don't want my number 2 guy being the guy where there are some games where he blows up. I want him just to be dominant every single game of the week.
I can kind of buy that because I do know what you're talking about. There was a game against the Oakland Raiders.
Those guys are good. Those stats are good if you take them into 3rd, 4th, 5th round. You'll take that. But as your second pick, man, outside of Adrian Peterson, that has to be a home run. And if that's not a home run, then you virtually failed. Your draft failed because how many guys did any of you guys take Chris Johnson last year?
I didn't have Chris Johnson in any of my leagues last year.
I took him last year. You know how many weeks I was frustrated with my first pick being Chris Johnson and how many games he was ineffective? That crippled my season because I'm not hitting home runs every week with my first round pick. And this, and basically the reason why we're putting Doug Martin in big time category. You got to be a big time player in fantasy football if you're going to be the second pick of the draft. Let's face it. You got to hit home runs every week. I'm not saying like the 152 touchdown, 3 touchdown games, but you got to be consistent and you got to dominate. You got to dominate your position, that position every week. And I don't feel confident drafting him at the number 2 pick. That's all I'm trying to say. If you draft him at like 4, 5, 6, hey, why not? He fell to you, you'll take it. But second pick, man, there are other guys who deserve consideration as well that aren't even getting considered, and who I think should be, who could make the case for for the top 2 pick in the draft.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I know Doug Martin had a good season last year, and I know that 2 of those games that he had last year were really big. He had a game against Oakland where he put up, I think it was 51 fantasy points.
He has like 4 touchdowns.
Yeah,
it was absurd.
And his other really big game came against the Vikings on a Thursday night game. He shredded the Vikes for, it was like 3 touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns, and a passing touchdown. He had a big bulk of his fantasy season in like 2 or 3 games. So I see what you're saying about consistency. But
that's because that's your first pick in the draft. That's what I mean.
Right. I absolutely understand. Well, what about Alfred Morris? Are you sold on Alfred Morris after his rookie season?
He's interesting to me. You read that he's trying to, he wants to basically develop hands at the NFL level because last year he had stone hands. He was basically like Michael Turner. No hands, but just pure rushing yards. And I have mixed feelings on him, because I'm keeping him in my keeper league because I didn't draft him and I acquired him as a free agent, so I'm keeping him because I get to sacrifice a later round pick with him. But with him, he's gonna get. I'm confident that he's gonna get the yards. What I'm not confident is he's gonna get the catches. I'm not confident in Mike Shanahan. He might pull some Shanahanigans on me and just go ahead and just, if he fumbles, take him out because we all know Mike Shanahan. He'll do that because he just doesn't care about us. And how will RG3 recover from his injury? And if he does recover from his injury, are he going to take those end zone touches away from Alfred Morris?
Alfred Morris did have 1,600 yards rushing last year. And...
He had the yards, but if you look at the stats, he got a bulk of his touchdowns in the fantasy playoffs when the season ended. Not like in the beginning of the season, in the middle of the season. He got them in like week 16, 17 when my league was over by that point. So I was just like, hey, Alfred Morris, thanks. I appreciate it. How come you couldn't get me these 2-3 touchdowns in week 8 when I lost? You only got me like 100 yards on 20 carries and no catches. And that's 10 points right there. And but I wouldn't mind having him in like the second round. Like if he falls to you get him at like a 12-team league, you get him at pick 14, 15, but he's like the tail end of the number 1 running backs, just strictly, on his yards and, his, that offense, just that offense that they run up there in Washington.
Yes. So with the receptions, I don't know if I would call it stone hands so much. He was actually only targeted 15 times and caught 11 of them. That's a 73% catch rate. That's not bad for a running back that's never really had a ton of impact in a passing game, at any level that he's played. It's something that they've been working on in training camp. Are you hopeful at all that he is going to take a step up and be more of a PPR running back in the future, or do you think this is basically what we're getting from him?
I hope he does, because that makes drafting in the later years so much easier. If he can catch, there you go. Your running back class is a little deeper now. You don't have to worry about, after the first round, who the hell are you going to get at running back? You know what I mean? So I'm hoping he develops, and I'm sure Washington wants him to develop as a pass-catching running back. Fantasy people want him to develop as a pass-catching running back, because that's what takes you. If you can catch the ball, in my eyes, if you can catch the ball in fantasy football world, that's what takes you to an above-average running back to the elite running back, because you could have 50 yards rushing, but if you catch 4 or 5 balls for 50 yards, I mean, you've basically changed your stats for that week alone. I mean, let's face it. If you can catch the ball, there's a reason why guys like Ray Rice, LaShawn McCoy, and Jamal Charles, people were so high on them this year, is they might not get like the 1,600 yards. Jamal Charles might. But LaShawn, they might not get those large amounts of yards, but they will get the balls to back up the stats. And if he can catch the ball, I don't care if he goes 1 yard. Hey, that's a point right there. And over time in a game, that adds up. And then you take each game like that adds up into the season, and just the pure opportunities of giving the ball to a running back in the open space creates the possibility for touchdowns and playmaking, and playmaking ability right there alone. So, that's why I hope he does, because it takes him from Stephen Ridley to, a freak at running back.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there. That's a lot who he reminds me of right now, Stephen Ridley, which isn't a bad thing. It's just he could develop more of an impact in the passing game for sure.
I mean, don't we all want him to improve?
Yeah, I think we all do. I think anyone that doesn't is probably a Cowboys fan.
Yeah, I mean, if it's fantasy football, we're on the show for a reason. So chances are we want all these players to improve, because it makes drafting for us 10 times easier.
Exactly. Well, thanks so much, Chris, for coming on today. Do you want to take a quick second to tell everyone where they can find you on social media and the internet and everything like that?
You can locate me on the Twitter machine, Chris Cochran 790. That is Chris Cochran 790. That is the company I'm affiliated with and I work for, but I am not doing numbers for fantasy football and writing articles on Greg Jennings.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Chris. I'm sure we'll have you on again during the season.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I loved talking with you guys, and we'd love to do it again.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Check out ProFootballCentral.com for all the latest NFL news and analysis. Also, check out the very popular Pro Football Central radio network for awesome NFL talk around the league. Go to ProFootballCentral.com. ProFootballCentral.com.
Welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. We're joined now by Matt Rittle, a writer for RotoViz, Late Round QB, and 4for4.com. Matt, welcome to the show. How's it going, man?
What's going on?
Not a lot. So, you and I were talking about coming on the show. We were talking about some cool topics to talk about, and we really like the idea of sort of picking one or the other players and debating them. So I kind of wanted to just throw some names your way, and we can all talk about them. The first guys I have on the list here is Demaryius Thomas versus Julio Jones. Who would you rather have and why?
Demaryius Thomas.
Thank you.
I think Julio. When I first saw this one, I was baffled, and then I thought about it, and I guess I kind of see where you're going. They're both young, talented people in an offense that's going to spread it around. So I guess that's component. I love Julio Jones, so please do not mistake what I'm about to say. At least in redraft, I think he's being slightly overvalued. It's almost a coin flip to me if I'd rather have Roddy White or Julio Jones. I'd rather have Julio Jones in redraft, but I think it's more like 52-48. It's pretty close to me. If we were saying Roddy White or Demaryius Thomas, I think everyone would say Demaryius Thomas. He has elite size speed combination. His hands are great. He's going to get even more one-on-ones, which is just a matchup most defenses will lose almost every time. So I love some Demaryius Thomas this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. And my thing with Julio is him and Roddy have really, especially last year, if you look at the numbers, they really went back and forth one would be the top performer one week, then the next week it would be the other. And when you're going for your wide receiver one, you're really banking on them putting up that normal, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Consistency.
Yes, consistency. Thank you. The consistent numbers every single week in, week out, so you can just depend on them. And I'm not saying Julio's not dependable because, dude's a stud. But between Roddy and Tony Gonzalez, I worry a little bit there. As far as Demaryius goes, he's by far Peyton's favorite target. It was very obvious last year. They've built quite the rapport, and I really don't think Wes Welker coming in is going to cut into that as much as everybody thinks it is. I think the people in Denver that'll suffer more are going to be Eric Decker and the tight ends. So it's a slim margin for me, but I have definitely noticed that I've been going Demaryius Thomas versus Julio. What do you think, Brian?
Well, I absolutely agree. I posted this question because I got asked this on Twitter over the weekend, and I told the guy, it was a keeper question. He asked me if he would rather keep, Julio Jones or Demaryius Thomas, and I told him I'd take Demaryius Thomas. And I actually asked a couple other people, and I actually got ganged up on. Everybody was, no, take Julio Jones. And I finally caved. I'm like, yeah, man, go with those guys. I take Demaryius Thomas, and I take Demaryius Thomas for this reason. You mentioned that targets aren't going to be that big of an issue in Denver. I feel the same way. I just break down, like we were talking earlier with Chris Cochran, and I just break down the quarterbacks, and they're both great quarterbacks, but I choose Peyton Manning over Matt Ryan 100% of the time, and in doing that, I lean towards Demaryius Thomas when it comes to choosing between the two. But in reality, we're probably splitting hairs a little bit here because they're both top 5, 6, top 7 guys, at the wide receiver position, but put a gun to my head and make me choose, I'm going to take Demaryius Thomas, 10 out of 10 times for sure.
See, that's interesting to me, though, because you said this is from a keeper standpoint. I think I have to go Julio without question. D. Thomas, once Peyton's gone, there's going to be some question marks there about how he's going to work with whoever the new quarterback is, how the new quarterback's going to work. We assume it'll be Osweiler, but we don't know. With Julio, Tony Gonzalez isn't long for the league. Roddy is going to probably decline at some point. The future's just looking brighter for Julio matched up with Matt Ryan. So I think if we're talking keeper or dynasty leagues, I'm going Julio over Demaryius Thomas every time. Do you agree, Matt?
I don't mind that. It's pretty close. I would probably agree with you, Nick. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this one's really interesting.
Ganged up on again.
Well, at least we were all on the same page about redraft.
Right.
It also, and it's just to mention too, depends on the type of keeper league. If it's like a no penalty keeper for a 5-year type of thing, then yeah. But but it also depends on rounds, and some people have increasing penalties, and that can vary. So who's next?
The next one we have on the list is Tony Romo versus Eli Manning. What do you think, Matt, here?
I love Eli. I was a big Eli owner last year, and I say this not as a frustrated owner at all. I own a lot of Eli this year, but I'll take Romo.
I'm actually going to go Tony Romo as well. As much as I love Eli, I think Hakeem Nicks is going to be, or I should say, I hope Hakeem Nicks is going to be healthy most of the year. I still think that Des Bryant and now I'm drawing a blank on the name of the Jason Witten, excuse me. Their big tight end down there. He gets a lot of catches. You still have Miles Austin, excuse me. I'm just struggling today. I think over the whole season, I'm going to go Tony Romo here. I think he's going to push for 4,000 yards again, and he's going to be hovering right around 30 touchdowns. And I don't know if Eli Manning can get to 30 touchdowns this year, so I'll go with Romo. How about you, Nick?
Yeah, I'm going to lean with Romo, just because, everyone Romo never passes the eye test, really. Everyone hates on him, blames him for a lot of things that happen in Dallas. But when you look at the numbers, Romo's a dependable fantasy quarterback. And I might be a little skewed here, but I have a phobia of Eli Manning now because of last season. I was riding it out. It was going great through week 7, and then those 3 weeks in a row where he had 5 points, 3 points, and 2 points just killed my team. And so I've just been really
there.
Yeah. And I think you're a little more forgiving, I guess, than I am, because I'm just I have completely steered clear of Eli in every single draft I've had this year, and I'll go Romo all day. I've always been a Romo apologist from a normal football standpoint too, so I have no problem taking Romo as my fantasy quarterback. If we're talking dynasty, I don't really want to touch either. I'm going to be looking someone younger. Kaepernick, Wilson, Andy Dalton, Luck, the whole bunch of young quarterbacks. I'm not looking someone that's pushing 30 or over 30 already. As far as back to running backs for a second here, this is an interesting one for me. Maurice Jones-Drew or DeMarco Murray? Brian, you can take the first this time.
Oh yeah, put me on the spot. Is there a third option? To be honest with you, I'm gonna end up taking Maurice Jones-Drew here over DeMarco Murray, but it's not because I'm in love with Maurice Jones-Drew. I feel like maybe he could have a bit of a bounce back year, but I know he's last year he was gone for most of the year. The year before he touched the ball quite a bit. I don't know how much tread is actually left on those tires, but DeMarco Murray just absolutely scares me. I feel like the wind blows the right way and he's going to be gone for 3 weeks. So I have to go MJD on this one.
Matt?
MJD, it's, again, intellectually, I kind of see why we're comparing them, but on my ranking sheets, I mean, they're separated by just about a full round on my rankings. So I'm going MJD. People like to, the Liz Frank, and they're worried and his age or something. He's not that old. He's not 30. He is more, I forget the stat, but I just saw recently he has like the most top 5 running back finishes of any running back over the last 5 or 6 years. He led the league in rushing 2 years ago. I think he's a nice bounce back candidate, and I think risk is priced into his ADP right now. In terms of DeMarco Murray, he's a funny one for me because if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I intellectually do not believe in injury proneness, and let's not get into that whole separate thing, but just I don't necessarily. That said, DeMarco Murray freaks me the hell out, and I can make an exception for him. So I have not drafted him once this year. There is a point I would draft him at, but I'll typically take a Lamar Miller or someone else above DeMarco Murray still. So I have not gotten him once.
Yes. If Lamar Miller, David Wilson are sitting there, I'm hopping on that train all day. I'm going to avoid Murray like the plague if I can help it. I agree with you with MJD. You're right. He's been one of the best top 5 fantasy running backs. He did lead the league in rushing. And I think behind that offensive line and with lackluster quarterback play, they're going to lean on him just like they always have. I'm back to his days with Mark Brunell. I mean, it's one of those things where MJD is going to hopefully, if he can stay healthy, dominate. And I don't really have a question about that. As far as DeMarco Murray goes, I'm with you, Brian, 100% of the way. I really feel like every time he blinks an eye, he pulls a hamstring or something. So it's one of those things where, in theory, I'm not really trying to draft either one of these guys. I'm going for, like you said, like a Lamar Miller type more. But if I had to choose, like gun to my head, I'm going to go MJD. But I'm definitely not looking either in Dynasty either. MJD's getting up there in age, and DeMarco Murray is just not dependable in the slightest. So I just can't justify taking DeMarco Murray at all right now, especially because some sites still have him ranked as like the 14th, 15th best running back, and I can't get behind that.
My thing with DeMarco Murray is, and first of all, I should say, if he's healthy all year, then you've gotten a great pick. So we're not telling you not to draft DeMarco Murray. If he was healthy the whole year, I don't know that he's a running back one if he plays 16 games. That's just myself, and part of that is just my belief in the Dallas running game. They've been touchdown anemic for years now, and there's no reason to think that's going to improve this year. They didn't do anything significant to change their overall running game this year. So if he's healthy for 16, I would think he would finish about running back 14 or 15 to me. So that price to me does not factor in the risk that he won't.
Okay, fair enough. I don't know. There's just it's one of those things we talked about with Lad Davies on eDraft Radio last week. Sometimes you just have that irrational fear of a guy and you won't touch him no matter what. And for me, that's definitely DeMarco Murray.
That's Murray for me, the one guy.
So for tight ends here, and this is another good one. Antonio Gates or Brandon Pettigrew for 2013, Matt.
Yeah, Pettigrew, I guess.
So
I feel
committal.
the same way.
I just don't know what Gates has left. I understand that his talent and who he's been historically. Last year, as we know, was a little bit of a mess for him. Pettigrew is not sexy. He's not going to be a top 4 finish, but we know what we're getting. The camp reports are good. He's consistent every year, if possibly not every week, but he's consistent every year. Detroit, most prolific pass offense in the league in terms of volume. So I'll take the guy that I know is going to finish as a low tight end 1 over a guy who might finish it kind of in the middle of the tight end ranks and might just be done. I'd rather take the sure thing at that point.
Yeah, I tend to agree, although I'm not sure I want to agree, if that makes any sense at all to either one of you guys. I look at Gates, and for years he was a top 3-4 tight end, and but injuries obviously have, crushed his career as of late. But you look at this year, Denario Alexander's done for the year. Malcolm Floyd just went down, and they're fearing. I know they called it a strained knee, but they're fearing it may be an ACL. If that's the case, Antonio Gates becomes their de facto number 1 option in San Diego for Phillip Rivers, and if that's the case, and if he can stay healthy, there's this really the sky's the limit, because he'd get an endless number of targets there. But I don't know how I can just rely on that, because I feel like maybe in week 3 he'd be done for the year with some sort of crazy injury, like he has been over the course of the last few years. I'd lean with Brandon Pettigrew for just what Matt says. He's going to finish a low end tight end 1, and he's going to get you solid enough numbers to get you through the season, and maybe win you a couple of weeks here and there. So that's who I'd roll with, Pettigrew.
Yeah, my thing with Antonio Gates is just one of the most talented athletes, really the second big time, college basketball player to successfully make the transition to tight end after Tony Gonzalez. And we always expected high things from him. And I'm really interested to see what he can do with a new offense, with a new offensive mind. But at the same time, he just can't stay healthy, and I just don't see him lasting until week 6, to be completely honest. Pettigrew's my guy here. The only thing I worry about with Pettigrew is he had a case of the dropsies for a few weeks last year, and it's you could see it frustrate him and sort of lead Matt Stafford not to throw to him as much. It got Tony Scheffler involved in more. So that's where things get really murky. But I think if Pettigrew's on his game, he doesn't have brick hands for a couple weeks, he'll finish low end tight end 1, high end tight end 2. And just a quick question for you guys about Pettigrew. Do you worry about Reggie Bush cutting into his targets at all?
Theoretically, but it's not enough to. I feel like his price is right. Even if he gets less targets than he might if Bush wasn't there, you're not overpaying for Pettigrew.
Okay.
I'm not worried at all, and here's why. Last year, the Detroit Lions used Joique Bell out of the backfield a lot. He actually, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but I want to say he was 5th or 6th in the entire NFL among running backs in receptions last year, and that was as a backup running back for the year. So I don't really fear him losing targets at all to Reggie Bush, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I guess. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, I just kind of I was going to say to close this out, but Nick might have something to add. But my closing thought here, too, is that part of this is draft strategy. If you're drafting one of these 2 tight ends, you're drafting these guys probably as your tight end number 1. I mean, if you already have Jimmy Graham, then maybe I would take Gates, but really I would take someone 6 rounds later anyways. So if you're drafting one of these guys, you're probably drafting your tight end number 1, in which case I would take production this is about the 10th round or so. I would take production over hoping for slightly more upside with Gates. So part of it is that.
Yeah, definitely. And you made a really valid point there. And I know, just off the top of my head, at least 4 of the leagues I'm in, Pettigrew was actually still just sitting on the waiver wire as a free agent when the draft was over. So I think people are really low on him for whatever reason, and it might be a guy you can get in the second to last round, or maybe even in the waiver wire, that's going to give you, quality low-end tight end one production. So I think Pettigrew is definitely the safer / better pick there.
Let's switch over and first of all, just explain equity disparity for the people who may not know what that means, and then we'll get into some players who's who we can discuss this equity disparity with, and about discuss their ADP and who's about to rise and who's about to fall here.
Sure. Equity disparity, and that's just kind of an unofficial term that we've been tossing around Twitter this off season. But it's the equity difference between how you value them and their ADP. And these tend to be the players that you draft a lot. If you have a guy that you think should go in the 4th and he's going in the 6th, that's probably a player you're going to get a lot. The players I get in the 2nd and 3rd round a lot are guys that I typically think are going 5 or 6 spots too low. So they fall to me a lot in the 2nd or 3rd, and I'm very happy to get them. So this is kind of who you end up drafting a lot. And this is, fancy terminology aside, something everyone's familiar with. Everyone has that guy that they love that they feel like should go 3 rounds earlier. So they'll wait an extra round or 2 and take them around early, and they're as happy as can be. So the problem is, for those of us who have been kind of drafting all off season, is the rise and falls of people. And it's easy to become attached. And I think attachment is where you can lose a lot of value. For instance, I was the originator, or one of the originators, of the Vereen hype train. It was not so much that I loved Vereen as a prospect, though I do. It was more that there was a tier of 3 or 4 guys that I thought were similar. Some of those guys were going in the 4th round, and I could get Vereen in the 8th back when I started this train. And so to me, that was just obvious, that's a guy. Now Vereen's going in the 5th, and I still draft him some, but I kind of have to find new targets now, because a lot of the information is so quick. Someone has one catch, and now the whole country knows about that catch that Des Bryant made at training camp. The information is so quick out there. So you can become attached and start reaching for players. I think the smarter thing to do as new information gets out there and more people learn what some of us have already known for a while is you have to find the new disparities. You have to find the new players that people are sleeping on. And so that's kind of what I've been thinking about the last week or two, and I emailed Nick a few thoughts I had.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on the Vereen hype train for a minute, because I'm still really mad at you for that. I was very much enjoying just taking him in the 4th, 5th, 6th round, minding my own business, nobody knowing what I was doing. And then Matt started preaching about him on Twitter, and all of a sudden everyone was grabbing him in the 3rd, and I was just perturbed because I kind of had to switch up my whole strategy. If you look at the first few teams I drafted, I have him on every single one, and I think I only have him on one since now. So it's one of those things. You're right, though. The news is so readily available, and with groupthink pretty much just ruling the fantasy world on Twitter, it doesn't take much for a few people to get high on a guy and it to spread very, very quickly. And it's one of those things too where the whole Twitter community is involved with the MFL. Like, we use it so much that when we have discussions like that and we drive the hype train, I really feel like it directly affects the ADP, and you can see it happen.
If you're in these my fantasy league draft masters that they're doing, it's hilarious actually, because there'll be like a preseason game in the middle of the draft, and then I think didn't Dobson get pulled for, this is a couple games ago, the Patriots. I think Dobson got pulled for a little bit, and then some receiver came in and had one good catch, and all of a sudden that receiver goes in the 10th round of a draft you're doing. It's that quick, 5 minutes later.
Yeah, that's 21st century. The information's always there, and it's making things change way too fast for my liking sometimes, but you got to keep up with it, So let's talk about a few guys whose ADP we should expect to rise, through the preseason. The first one we have on the list is Fred Davis, the tight end for Washington. What are you seeing here?
Sure, and this is a list that I gave you, and so my thoughts on Fred Davis were he's a very talented guy. I think we're suffering from recency bias with Fred Davis. He played through an injury for most of last year, and so he did not play that well. He was rather injured. So I think a lot of people are just remembering how he was not that great last year, and so they're not really drafting him that high. I can get him in 15th and 16th rounds in a lot of cases. I mean, he's going after, I don't know how to say the name, Hausler, or whatever it is. He's going I mean, he's kind of in the Delaney Walker area almost in terms of ADP. Yet, if he's healthy, and all the reports are that he's running around great, his speed is back, he seems very healthy. I think it was an ankle last season. So I think as he plays a few games and people see him running around and connecting with RG3 like he was pre-injury last year, I'm not saying that I would take him over Pettigrew necessarily, but after Pettigrew and after I like Martellus Bennett a lot, I mean, after a couple of those guys are off the board, he's my favorite guy. And not only is he my favorite guy, but I can get him 3 or 4 or 5 rounds after those other people.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it. It's one of those things where once a player's injured for an extended period of time, like most of last season, our fantasy memory is so short that we kind of write them off like, oh, well, he's not going to do anything this year. And I've actually seen people drafting Jordan Reed, who I'm really high on, and in Dynasty has a ton of value. But I'm seeing people draft Jordan Reed right around, your Pettigrews, your Hauslers, your Zach Ertz instead of Fred Davis. And it always kind of baffled me because this was one of the best tight ends in the league just 2 years ago. So it's one of those things where I'm really thinking his ADP is going to skyrocket once we hit a couple preseason games and see him out there catching balls again.
Yeah, I don't know about where his ADP will end up. I value him just kind of, I love Martellus Bennett. I don't think it's just because I'm a Bears fan, but kind of right around there, right after him. And if there's another, maybe, I don't know, Field of Jordan Cameron, I'm falling out of love with him, but kind of right around those guys is where I think his value should be. But you can draft him much later. So that's a big disparity for me right now.
All right, what about some rookies here? Let's talk rookie running backs. Look, Le'Veon Bell are you seeing his ADP rise? I mean, as far as hype, or is he getting drafted too high right now because of the hype, or is he about right? Is he being drafted right about where he should be?
I would say not high enough. And Bell and I have a funny story. I have not drafted Bell once. I fell asleep on Bell. There was a sentiment out there that I had heard from 5 or 6 people that he was kind of a jag, just another guy, but he might get the ball a lot. And so, I was imagining another kind of Sean Green scenario here, and I was just not ready to buy into a rookie Sean Green, who I didn't know how he could pass block, and he was going way too early for me. So I have not drafted Bell once. I recently got into some conversations with Davis Matek. He's kind of my, I hope I said that right. He's kind of my go-to prospect metric stat guy. And I talked with JJ later on, QB guy as well. And between the two of them, they really sold me on Bell. Bell is not just another guy, at least in terms of metrics and prospect value anyways. He did not play on TV a lot in college. He was not drafted in the first round. Some of the tape guys do not love how he looks, the eye test. So he has not gotten a lot of affection necessarily from the fantasy community, which is funny to say about a rookie being drafted in the 3rd or 4th round, but he hasn't. His metrics are outstanding. Everything about him is great. Comparable for him, just to give you an idea, I think in terms of fantasy situation, but also as a prospect, he compares pretty well to Doug Martin. Now, he is not Doug Martin. I'm not selling that, but he might be 80% of Doug Martin, which is pretty dang good. So, I mean, if you're looking at kind of Doug Martin light in an offense that typically likes to drive running backs into the ground, literally, then that's a guy that all of a sudden, if all this is true, if he can get 250 plus carries, maybe even 300 carries, which let's not say that, but if he can get 200, 250 plus carries, this is all of a sudden a guy I might take in front of Darren McFadden. This is a guy I probably want over David Wilson. So he's going at the end of the 3rd a lot. Occasionally I'll see him go in the middle of the 4th or so, but I still think he should be going in the middle of the 3rd at this point. There's several. I would take him over several guys that are consistently going in the late 3rd.
Okay. What about Giovanni Bernard out of Cincinnati?
Yeah, I was also late to the Bernard train. I don't love him per se. I don't necessarily think that he'll make Ben Jarvis fantasy irrelevant. Excuse me. Ben Jarvis is probably going to be a good value on draft day as well. I do think he's going to be relevant. He's going to catch a lot of passes. He's a playmaker. And even if all he does is kind of this Sproles-esque type of role, that's a guy, if you can get him in the late 4th or 5th round of drafts, which you can, I think that's a great guy to target. I'm not ready to reach for him yet. If you start reaching for him, you have to start hoping that he'll overtake Ben Jarvis and just get 20 carries a game, and I don't know that that'll happen. But even at, say, 10 carries a game or so, 10 touches a game or so, I think that's a guy with a lot of value. So if you take maybe some receivers in the 2 or 3 receivers in the first 4 rounds, that might be a guy in the 5th round to target.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's one of those guys where I've run into a couple times where I just no really good running backs available, so I went wide receiver instead in like rounds 2 or 3. So sitting there at 4, I saw Gio, and being a guy that does scout college, does watch extensive tape heading into the draft. He was my number 1 running back headed into the draft, a guy I've been so high on since day one. The minute they picked him, I said it was such a great fit, and I love it. And I think even as their running back too, with Ben Jarvis Green Ellis getting the bulk of the carries, all Bernard really needs is 10 to 12 carries and 5 or 6 receptions to be a running back too, fantasy number wise, especially in PPR leagues. And the icing on the cake is they actually have him returning kicks as well. So if you do get points for that, he's just going to help you even more. I really like Gio, and I think you're right. 4th round is a great place to get him right now, and you really could depend on him probably as a low-end running back too. That's like his floor right now, and it's only going to get better, especially if we're talking dynasty. Looking to the future, this is probably one of the first rookies I would take in a rookie startup draft, to be honest.
It's worth noting, too, and I don't mean to sound silly when I say this, but the Hard Knocks is on Cincinnati. Now, you couldn't pay me to watch Hard Knocks, but a lot of people do. He's a very likable dude. He's a good character guy. He comes across well. He interviews well. He just kind of gets it in terms of what it means to be an NFL player and work hard. And so people are going to watch him. They're going to see a good player or two on TV. They're going to see him come across well on TV. And his ADP is going to go up. Right now you can get him sometimes in the middle or late 5th. I don't mind taking him in the late 4th, but his ADP is only going to go up as the preseason goes on.
Okay, so kind of on the reverse side of the rookie running backs, we have a veteran here, Ahmad Bradshaw. Put up good numbers with New York when he was there, when he was healthy. He went out with that injury. It took him a long time to sign on as a free agent, but now he's part of the Colts organization. He's listed as their number 1 back. How long is it really until we just see his ADP skyrocket?
Here's a question I ask myself about some guys' ADPs. If he played 1 or 2 preseason games and looked okay, what would his ADP be? Is what I ask myself. If he played, say, 10 minutes in a preseason game and looked good, I mean, he would his ADP would shoot up, right? I mean, he'd be like a 4th rounder probably in my mind. And so there's a little bit of risk there if you're early to the train, but kind of reading the tea leaves is kind of how you get some of your value. Particularly if you're in a draft only, you can get him in the 6th, sometimes 7th round. I got him in the late 7th yesterday in a draft. I've almost never seen him go in the 5th. If you're in a draft only league, you don't have to even read the injury reports every week. I mean, even if he puts up 10, 11, 12 games, if you're getting him in the 6th or 7th round, that's an amazing value. And I don't mind reading injury reports. I mean, Westbrook was a top 10 guy every year, and maybe he gave you a couple headaches along the way, but he was good. And so it's kind of the same thing where you might have to read the injury report every week. You might even miss week 1 or 2 with Bradshaw this year. But if you get 10, 12, 13 starts out of him, and you get him in the 6th or 7th round, that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm struggling today. When it comes to Ahmad Bradshaw, I'm a little bit higher on him than anybody else. I actually have him ranked as my 17th overall running back. I don't know. I feel like I'm higher than anybody else out there on the guy. And I don't know if maybe I'm, starting to rethink that and reconsider that. But I think he's gonna fit perfect in that Colts organization with Andrew Luck at quarterback, those weapons at the receiver position. I think once the season starts, he's gonna have a really solid season. He's gonna put up numbers, similar to what he did in New York, and I think people are really undervaluing him right now.
Wow. 17, really.
He's my 17th overall running back right now. I'm not ashamed to admit it.
You know, it potentially, I agree with you fully. Like, he has the potential to be the 17th best running back, no doubt. I don't know if I could put him there right now, though. That's my only thing.
Well, and like I said, let's say he put 2 weeks of solid practice in. Where would you rank him? I mean,
Sorry,
top
one more time, Matt?
for sure. If you let's say he put in 2 weeks of good practice, where would you rank him?
Ugh. We talking about practice?
Well,
Yeah, AI practice.
I would probably top between 20 and 25.
Yeah, but he's not being drafted there yet.
Yeah. So you're right, though, and I think especially with the best ball leagues, which is a format I just found out about this year, and I love it, because you can take a bigger risk on guys like this because you don't have to worry about setting that lineup. You just draft the guys that you think will do well, and that's that. Whoever has the best weeks will be the points that are counted, and you go forward from there. So I think Bradshaw might be one of the more valuable, questionable picks as far as best ball leagues come, because you could end up with, like we talked about, like a fringe running back 1, high end running back 2 by the end of the season if he stays healthy.
Yeah, and even if you only get, I'll undercut it. If you get 10 games of fringe running back 1 status from a guy you took in the 6th or 7th round, you've won. That's amazing.
Definitely. So the last one we have on this list here, and this is an interesting one for me because we've heard so many different reports. Ronnie Hillman from Denver. For a while there, we had John Fox, Peyton Manning, every beat writer all coming out and saying Moneyball's the guy. It's going to be his show. We're not going to hold him back. And then, right away, last OTAs even, I think it was, all of a sudden we found out Ronnie Hillman's actually been the dude that's really stepped up. He's taken most of the first team carries, and it's looking like it's going to be him now. Is this someone who we should be buying low while we can right now before his ADP goes way up? Or should we sort of be leery of John Fox and his whole running back theory?
I don't have enough time to touch John Fox and his running back theory. Let me kind of walk through some of the ball hype. He was drafted highly. A lot of people loved him. We're all smart enough generally to realize that a Peyton Manning running back is valuable. And no one loved any of the running backs last year, and Hillman wasn't that great last year, to be honest. So Ball must be the guy that's going to be awesome. All of his hype always kind of seemed to me to be based off his prospects as an NFL player and based off a lot of coach speak. So there were reports about Peyton Manning talking about how good he's going to be, but if you actually read the quote, Peyton Manning was just a lot of coach speak. We want him to be involved. We hope he's a good player for us. It was a lot of that type of talk, Hillman took first-team snaps at OTAs, and everyone laughed and said, oh, just wait, it's going to be Ball. Okay, but now we're starting to get real reports out of Denver. If you talk to people who are watching the camps, not the guys giving you coach speak, you can talk to the beat reporters, talk to some just kind of normal people who are out in Denver, and they all tell me that Ball looks like a rookie, which is fine. He is a rookie, so that's okay. But that, he's struggling in pass protection. He's making a lot of mistakes. The same people also all tell me, I'm hearing this from multiple different sources who don't know each other, that Hillman looks like the best running back in camp. So I'm not prepared to draft Hillman in the 5th or 6th round. He does come with some nervousness. Don't count out Noshawn Marino out of this argument. Ball could easily pick it up halfway through the season and have a strong second half. But Hillman is going so late right now. It all depends on where you can get him. Some drafts people will reach for him in the 6th or 7th or 8th round, but you can still get him in the 10th or 12th round of some drafts. And for a potential Peyton Manning running back, a guy that people are calling one of the highlights of the Denver camp for the running, definitely the running back highlight of the Denver camp, then I think that's worth the risk anyways. I'm not necessarily sold on him, but at his price, it's definitely a risk I'm willing to take.
Yeah, I'm with you. He's one of those guys where reading all the reports, looking at everything, even being a Wisconsin guy like me and being really high on Monty Ball, if the reports are true that Hillman is, he is the best back on this team right now, I'll grab him all day, way down where he is right now. like you said with John Fox, we don't really have time to cover it, but if Monty starts playing better, or like partway through the season, Hillman doesn't play so well, I don't know how comfortable I am taking him. Right now, I'd say maybe like 6th round would be like the highest I'd even consider, and even then, I could probably find someone I'd rather like.
You're saying Ball or Hillman in the 6th?
Hillman, sorry.
No, I would not take Hillman in the 6th, and it's not that he's not worth the 6th. It's just that I don't think there's enough risk factored into that price yet. But I mean, if you can get him in after the 8th, which you can in most drafts, then I think that's just a great gamble.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
He's
I'm
got an
more
average
comfortable there.
ADP of 7.09 right now, so he's being taken in the later part of the 7th round in a lot of drafts out there right now. But I still think that might be just a shade high.
You said that you think that's a shade high?
I still think it might be a shade high. From my personal preference, I think that's a shade high. But I would take him in the 8th or 9th round for sure.
I think one thing that bothers me about ADP is an average. So you have a Denver guy who takes him in the 3rd, and now it says late 7, when maybe he goes in the 8th or 9th. You know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's true. That is true.
As the guy bringing up Hillman, the late 7th to me seems a shade high as well. But this is what I will say about Hillman. Let's assume that all these kind of whispers we're hearing are right. The more preseason games that happen, the more word gets out. And if he is the best back in Denver, as we're all kind of hearing whispers about, that late 7th round ADP is only going to go up. And if you're drafting today or tomorrow, it's kind of like trading up for free. You know, if you can take a guy who's going to go 2 rounds later in 2 or 3 weeks, which he very easily could, I think. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. So, point of the story, people, buy low now while you can before the ADP gets a little too ridiculously high. But I think that's all the time we have, Matt. Thank you so much for coming on. I love when we get to talk and do this on the radio. Do you want to tell everyone really quick all the websites you write for one more time and where they can find you on Twitter?
I do customer service for 4for4. I don't write for them, just to clarify that, but they are my favorite redraft site. So check out 4for4.com. They're great. I do some writing for RotoViz and just a little bit for late round QB as well. I'm at FF Rittle, Rittle on Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Matt. I'm sure we'll have you on again during the season. You have a great day.
Appreciate it, Matt.
Right,
thanks for
guys.
coming on, buddy.
Football fans, looking to get healthy this year? Now is the time, and I have the perfect place for you. Save 10% at onit.com/football radio. Exclusive PFC radio listeners save 10% off their order. That's onit.com, ONNIT.com/football radio.
And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central. Nick, that was a pretty jam-packed show we had today. What do you think?
Yeah, you know what? That was a great show. Our longest one yet, I'm thinking. I just want to thank everybody for listening. Thank Chris Cochran for coming on, talking some awesome fantasy stuff, and of course Matt Rittle. Always a pleasure to have him on as well. So if everyone wants to check us out at ProFootballCentral.com, you can check out our podcast plus 24 other great, amazing ones, and tons of breaking news and analysis on NFL and fantasy football. So check us out at ProFootballCentral.com and check out episode 5 of Fantasy Football Central Radio next Tuesday. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.
This has been a presentation of the Pro Football Central Network. For news, blogs, highlights, and more, log on to ProFootballCentral.com.